looking to select a contractor who will execute the final detailed design of the facility as well as construct it. So the bid documents were initially issued on January 18th. There was a virtual pre-bid meeting with the bidders on February 17th. The bids are now due to close on July 6th. So the bids are to be received by the government of Montserrat. I believe that's next Tuesday. The bids have to be open for 120 days. That's what we call the bid validity period. So anytime within those 120 days, the contractor holds their price. And we're expecting to award a contract based on review of the bids and a successful negotiation to award a contract to the successful contractor prior to the end of September of this year. The contractors then, once a contract is signed and they receive their notice to proceed, they have 18 months to design and build the facility. So during that 18 months, you may not see much activity on the initial, probably 3 or 4 months or up to 5 months, maybe even 6 months, because they will be doing some additional geotechnical investigations and they will be doing their detailed design of the facility. And then once that work is near completed, they can start the construction. Now, that's to be seen exactly when within that 18 months they will start construction. There's some activities, for example, dredging they could start earlier, bluff stabilization. That's to be seen what the contractors submit for their detailed schedules when we receive their bids next week. Following the completion of construction, and what we call the taking over certificate, there is essentially a 365-day, basically 1 year, 12 months, defects liability period. And that's just a fancy way of saying it's sort of the warranty period that we will come back after 12 months and do a full assessment and inspection of the facility, and any deficiencies that we find, the contractor must come back and fix those deficiencies. Next slide. So the project itself is expected to generate a lot of opportunities for local businesses as well as the people of Montserrat. There's a variety of building materials that are going to be needed. There's a lot of quarry sand and aggregate potential supply for the construction. There's a lot of concrete, cement. We anticipate if there's any steel works that will be imported from overseas. There's going to be a need for heavy equipment, from front-end loaders to cranes to whatever, typical construction equipment. There will be a need for both skilled and unskilled labor. People can work with concrete, tie rebar, deal with moving aggregates, able to operate equipment, these sorts of things. There will be a certain percentage of expatriate labor that's expected to arrive in Montserrat. Those people will need accommodations. So there's an opportunity for rental accommodations. There's an opportunity to rent vehicles to the successful contractor. And of course, those people, including the local labor and skilled and unskilled labor, as well as the expatriates, will need to eat and drink. So there will be food and beverage sales for that, particularly the expatriate labor. So there's a lot of local opportunities to benefit financially and economically from the project. And we're looking for the contractors to maximize the use of local resources, local labor, and the people of Montserrat. So with that, I'm now going to pass the presentation off to Sam Sally, from my colleague from Stantec, who is our environmental lead for the project, and he will be describing the environmental, and with the assistance later of Katrina Hines, of the social impact, environmental and social impact assessment that's been completed for the project. Sam?
Yes, thank you, Harold. And thank you for describing the project. It's very important to have a good project understanding in order to undertake a proper environmental and social impact assessment. It's rather a long word. We like to abbreviate it as an ESIA. But what is an ESIA? It is an environmental impact assessment, or EIA, and it's a social impact assessment that is part of the process for a good project planning and implementation. It helps to identify potential positive and negative project impacts. And based on those impacts, it can also recommend ways to mitigate, eliminate, or reduce those negative impacts. So the EIA in itself is information on a proposed development and, again, the potential positive and negative impacts on the environment. It recommends mitigation measures to eliminate or reduce negative impacts. So, I mean, just to clarify, what is a mitigation measure? A mitigation measure is something that you implement during a project, and it can be, for example, during dredging, where the excavator for the dredging will create a lot of sediment in the water column, and it may get transported, say, to Little Bay and onto the beach. The contractor would install a silt curtain, which is basically a boom, floating boom with a plastic sheath, if you like, or a curtain that goes all the way to the sea bottom, and that prevents the water then from being transported to other areas that can be impacted, potentially the coral reef or the Little Bay beach. So that is an example of a mitigation measure. The social impact assessment, it examines the social consequences. They're both also positive and negative social consequences of the planned projects. And it also has measures to eliminate or reduce impacts identified. Now, findings of the studies are used, in terms of the impact assessment by regulators in defining environmental protection measures. That must be done if permission is granted for the project. What this means is, even if you do an EIA on a project, it doesn't mean automatically it's going to be granted. There are certain permissions required by regulators, and in this case, it would be regulators from the government of Montserrat that need permission or from them in order to undertake the project. Another thing the EIA and SIA does, or if you like now, we can call it the ESIA, it provides guidance to architects and engineers towards producing a more environmentally and socially friendly design. So by identifying these impacts and tweaking them a bit to reduce or eliminate these impacts, it can be more acceptable and more friendlier for use of the project. Next slide, please. For the port project and the ESIA, we considered the national laws. You have to consider the national laws and policies of the government of Montserrat. We use the Physical Planning Act, Conservation and Environment Management Act, which is overseen by the Department of Environment. It has, what are the species at risk that should not be harmed, sensitive habitats that should be avoided, etc. And Port Authority Act, and other development plans and regulations, such as guidelines for the release of substances and pollutants, either in the air or in the water. International standards and guidelines were also considered in the ESIA, such as the World Health Organization, the World Bank Environmental Health and Safety Guidelines for ports, harbors, and terminals. And also the Caribbean Development Bank has its own environmental and social review procedures that should be followed when undertaking an ESIA and for any development projects that are supported by the Caribbean Development Bank or funded by the Caribbean Development Bank. Next slide, please. So the progress of the ESIA. The ESIA actually started way back in 2019 when a draft ESIA was undertaken for an original port layout that included a breakwater, a larger breakwater and a wharf. And that's shown on the bottom left-hand picture where it says 2019 original port layout. The government of Montserrat and the CB, they provided comments on the draft, and an ESIA was resubmitted by Stantec in September 2019. And this is the document that's also on a government website that can be reviewed. It's about 650 pages. It was quite an extensive investigation or assessment, an ESIA assessment. and it took into consideration environmental and social factors in the ESIA for the project for that original port layout. Then the port layout was revised in 2020 when there was no breakwater considered, and currently it has a smaller footprint, which is what the port layout that Harold had described for us in the previous slides and describing the project. That's on the bottom left-hand image. So you can see, next slide, please. So as a result of the revised conceptual port layout, we developed an ESIA addendum, or made an assessment on the current conceptual port layout. We're calling it the 2020 current conceptual port layout. And it relies on the original ESIA of Stantec in 2019, and it focuses on updating impacts that have changed since that original layout. And we can see on the right-hand side, the overlay of the original port layout with the current port layout, and we can see that it is smaller. So the impacts we assessed for the original certainly serves to address the ESIA for the smaller conceptual port layout of 2020, the current one, but we just focus or update the impacts that have changed. This ESIA addendum was reviewed by the Governor of Montserrat and the CDB, and it was released for public comments on June 18th, 2021, which was about 10 or 11 days ago. Next slide, please. So when we undertake an ESIA, we have to assess what are value components. And value components are determined based on social factors, resources of interest to stakeholders, interests by regulators that they would like to see protected, and that may affect, say, a business community as well. For environmental components, they're generally more focused around the port itself, what we call the project development area. And it's closer. We looked at the atmospheric environment was an important value component because of air quality in the area of Little Bay, the noise. We looked at the coastal features along the beaches and the hills like Little Bay, Cars Bay, and Rendezvous Bluff. We looked at the marine environment and the animals that are in the marine environment, the water quality, the reef corals, the marine plants, the fish, the whales and dolphins and sea turtles that are in the area of the Little Bay, as well as the marine birds that are nesting along the cliffs of the Rendezvous Bluff, and the land plants and animals, and for the animals, particularly the bats that are at the base of the cliff of the Rendezvous Bluff. Social components we looked at and that are of value, you can see them there. They range from what could be affecting public health and safety, that's important, the workers' health and safety, community services, employment, the landscape views, the business growth and development, the Little Bay business community, and particularly the divers and other users of Little Bay Reef, tourism, fishers, and shipping and related services as being an important social component or a value component. Next slide, please. So this is a closer view of the proposed port area. And the reason why this is a good overview of the environment, because it shows where the Little Bay Reef is located. It shows that the reef itself is a band around Rendezvous Bluff, and it may be a width of about 60 to 70 meters. And we see some overlay of the seaward coastal protection, the boulders and riprap that would be needed to be placed to protect the pier that Harold described earlier, as well as we see the locations of where the bats are. There are two caves. One is for the female bats, the maternity roost, and one's for the male bats, the bachelor roost. We see the area where there's going to be dredging, and then we can see Little Bay and the Little Bay Beach area. And so that tries to show the value, the environmental value components and some of the social components, such as, the Little Bay business community at the Marine Village. Next slide, please. For the ESI addendum, because the current port layout moved from the original layout, we needed to undertake an investigation of the seabed to know what could be impacted in the footprint of the port. And because of the pandemic in 2020, Stanta could not go on island or visit Montserrat. And so we engaged Island Solutions to help us with the diving and collecting the data for the seabed investigation. And they're based in Little Bay. And then with the data information that was collected, it was forwarded to us, and we did our analysis on the bottom habitat, what is there. So what was observed is mostly it's a sandy habitat. So most of the dredging area and further out from the coast, further away from that band that we saw where the Little Bay Coral Reef was, it's mostly sand. So the corals are mostly restricted to that narrower band near the bluff. And you see coral, sponges, and a seagrass closer to the coastline. The seagrass is an invasive species, Halophilia. It's found throughout, a lot of the other Caribbean islands. It's not much that can be done. Next slide, please. So additional social data was also collected for the current port layout and for the ESI addendum. And this was questionnaires and interviews in 2020. I think it was conducted in November and December of 2020 with stakeholders that would have an interest in the Little Bay area. And it includes the fishers who own boats and moored in Little Bay and their crew, tour operators who include the Little Bay Reef and their employees who help them and work for them, tour operators who include the Bat Cave in their tours, operators who conduct the bird watching tours on the Rendezvous Bluff, and then also owners of 3 businesses that are adjacent to the port area. They were interviewed and to obtain more data about this particular port layout. Next slide, please. So it is important in a ESIA also to develop what we call an environmental and social management plan. It is a requirement in a lot of the guidelines, including the CDB, World Bank guidelines, and even the government of Montserrat in developing certain projects, social management plans or environmental social management plans are required. This ESMP, we abbreviated ESMP, it's found as an addendum in the ESI addendum as Appendix A, and it contains a preliminary environmental and social management plan based on our current understanding of the port and the conceptual layout of the port and what we think how it may be constructed. What does the ESMP do? It provides recommendations for mitigation measures and monitoring requirements to eliminate or reduce negative environmental and social impacts. One example I gave earlier was about the silt curtain for when we do dredging. That's a mitigation measure. The ESMP is also a requirement that the contractor must develop for the port construction. So the contractor has to come up with an ESMP, and it is a living document. It's not a one-time document. You can have multiple revisions to an ESMP. It can be revision 1, revision 2, revision 3, as the project is designed. And as it proceeds during construction, there may be changes in some of the information and how things are done that may require a revision to how mitigation measures may be applied and how to monitor their effectiveness and in terms of the predictions of the ESIA about impacts during construction. Next slide, please. I'm not going to go through all these bullet points. It's just to show that in the ESMP, there are many plans that are identified and required. And you will see that these plans are aimed towards the environmental value components as well as the social value components. And those that are highlighted in bold are ones you're going to see further in other slides. And noise is always, every construction project has noise. There could be potential issues for air quality. in our particular case here, there is a bat monitoring and adaptive management plan, and then water quality, bird monitoring plan for the birds, coral transplantation and monitoring plan, because there are corals in the footprint of the pier, as well as in some locations of the dredging next to the potato hill. And from a social perspective, there are like road traffic control plan, where, you know, we don't want to see a convoy of trucks going adjacent to the marine village and maybe creating a lot of dust, noise, disruption of the business community in Little Bay, or just other ruining roads and so on. There is a traffic control plan. There's a stakeholder engagement plan on how to engage with the stakeholders, and that's described a little furthermore in other slides. A grievance redress mechanism, if there are grievances, how to raise them. That's part of the ESMP. And there are other plans that I'm not going into detail right now, but they're all found in the ESIA addendum, particularly in Appendix A in the ESMP. And then there's a resettlement action plan for project affected persons that are going to be displaced. Whoops. Okay, next slide. I know that's rather a lot, but there's a lot of information. The EIA, the key highlights and conclusions. So the impacts are on the corals in the port dredging area. We can see one example of a coral to the right. There are Antillean fruit-eating bats in the caves at the base of Rendezvous Bluff. The reason I'm saying fruit-eating bats is because they're not, you know, the dangerous kinds of bats. They're the nice bats that eat fruits, they disperse the seeds, and they make new plants, and they revegetate new areas. So they're good bats. Marine birds on the bluff are potentially impacted. Water quality for Little Bay Beach. Now, these environmental impacts are not likely to be significant because of mitigation measures and monitoring activities. And these are described in the ESMP. For example, the vulnerable and threatened corals in the port area will be transplanted. This is described in the coral transplantation and monitoring plan of the ESMP. The disturbance of cave bats, they will be monitored, and that's in the bat monitoring and adaptive management plan. The water quality in Little Bay will be monitored as part of the coastal features and marine water quality monitoring plan. And we can see at the bottom there, the picture of the bat caves. There's a maternity cave and the bachelor cave and the face of the Rendezvous Bluff. Next slide, please. This is a very busy slide. I don't intend on going through each social value components. Just the negative is the column on the left. The positive is the column on the right. You just quickly notice that a lot of the negative components are related to construction. And, you know, for example, the occupational health and safety, it is a high-risk occupation working on piers and COVID-19 virus. But on the plus side, there's going to be the mitigation measure of implementing a health and safety management plan. Landscape view will be disrupted during construction, but it is a temporary nuisance during construction only, and it will have improved aesthetics once construction is completed and the project is implemented. That's about 11 months of construction works. Could be 12, but it depends, as Harold indicated, the timing for the design and implement, and then increased cruise ship visitors, more cargo deliveries, and potential investor interests. The Little Bay business community may be affected by construction. There's the potential for that, but the benefits also from increased sales from workers during construction. And as you know, was noted, the increase in food and beverages and increased arrivals during port operations. Next slide, please. We have the divers and other users of Little Bay who are going to be affected. That's partly because of the little portion of the small portion of the Little Bay Reef will no longer be accessible because of the port footprint, but there will still be access to the rest of the reef during construction and operation. There would be increased business for tour operators due to more consistent cruise vessel arrivals during port operation. And you know, there are the plans for the resettlement action plan for the divers and users of the Little Bay Reef, and a grievance redress mechanism should there be any concerns. The same thing for tourism affected during construction, potentially A small portion of the bay, of the Little Bay Reef, will be no longer accessible. But as the port is built, that should increase the tourism and benefit from the port. Fishers, they're currently mooring in Little Bay, and during construction, they'll have provided after dredging, and they'll be provided with trailers for the fishers to bring in their boats and haul them out. The community aesthetics, nobody likes noise, but it's only during construction, and then the aesthetics will be improved once the port is done, built. And then the shipping and related services, well, there's a potential for temporary interruption, but the contractors understand that the ferry service and other services currently using the existing jetty should not be interrupted, but there could be an inconvenience, but the quality of life should tremendously improve with the operation of the new port, and once you get steady and reliable shipping to the island. Next slide, please. Here I just wanted to go over the stakeholder engagement plan as part of the ESMP, and it's developed to find the best way to share project information. So it's for regular, accessible, and transparent consultation. That's very important, to be transparent with stakeholders. And it guides the government of Montserrat on how best to engage with the stakeholders. This plan also recommends the process that allows stakeholders an opportunity to influence the project planning and implementation. And it ensures the stakeholder engagement plan is working as it should. I'd like to note too that the stakeholder engagement occurs throughout all the project phases. So with all these stakeholders, it's during the design, construction, and operation, not just the earlier phases. Next slide, please. I mentioned a grievance redress mechanism because it allows affected stakeholders to raise complaints or grievances about the project and be given adequate hearing. So stakeholders will be listened to, and where eligible issues will be resolved appropriately. So it should be resolved as soon as possible before they get out of control. So through the grievance redress mechanism allows that. And for that, there'll be an appointed community liaison officer who will be the focal point for handling grievances. Next slide, please. The Resettlement Action Plan is another key plan in the ESMP, and it's intended to ensure persons that are directly displaced by the project, either economically or physically, are adequately compensated. Now, to be a project affected person, you must have no legal claim to the land, marine area, or other assets taken or impacted by the project. So it has to be only that your space for your livelihood is being affected by the project, because that would be a different process if there's a legal claim. Based on social and economic assessment and interviewing with the stakeholders, there are 5 main categories of project affected persons, and we abbreviate that as PAPs. And they've been identified as the fishers who moor in Little Bay, fishers who fish on Little Bay Reef, spear fishers who fish on Little Bay Reef, tour operators and water sport tours on out of Little Bay and who use the Little Bay Reef, the Bat Cave on Rendezvous Bluff, and the bird watching operators who utilize Rendezvous Bluff. So you can see that from the social perspective, it's the environmental value components that could be affected by the project are the ones that are affecting the social value components and the stakeholders. Next slide, please. So just quickly to go over the RAP and the fishers, what kind of loss? Well, they're no longer being able to moor in a Little Bay. It's going to be partial and or permanent because there will be access to 5 newly installed moorings. They'll be provided with boat trailers at least for the, and they'll be provided with fuel coupons, at least for the first project year, because they will undergo extra time and fuel costs to bring in their boats in, take it out, and taking it to the boat yard that we see at the bottom left-hand picture, the boat yard being situated adjacent or behind the Little Bay Village. Next slide, please. Another project affected persons are the fishers. and who fish on Little Bay Reef, and their extra time and fuel costs. They are entitled to redeemable fuel coupons, at least for the first project year. So that's the fishers who fish on the Little Bay Reef. Next slide, please. Spearfishers who fish on Little Bay Reef are other project-affected RAPs that are captured in the Resettlement Action Plan. Their type of loss is, again, extra time and fuel costs, because a portion of the reef is affected. They may have to go further. And for that, they are entitled to some redeemable fuel coupons. Next slide, please. Tour operators are another category of project-affected persons. And these are tour operators who offer water sport tours out of Little Bay and who go on the Little Bay Reef and the Bat Cave on Rendezvous Bluff. There could be a potential loss of revenue, and there would be entitled to reimbursement for potentially the number of reduced customers at a rate of between 50 to 100% of the average posted tour price. And that's still to be, that's to be determined by the government of Montserrat. Next slide, please. Bird watching operators, it's in the same sort of category as project-affected persons as the bat caves. Tour operators, potential loss of revenue, and entitled to the same reimbursement for the number of reduced customers as a result of potentially construction at a rate of between 50 to 100% of the average posted tour price for a period to be determined by the government of Montserrat. Next slide, please. There are other forms of Resettlement Action Plan assistance and actions. They could include assistance identifying alternative mooring locations, for example, for the fishers, such as Plymouth and Buncombe Bay, fishing sites, Isles Bay and Cars Bay, reefs for tours, Rendezvous Bay and Yellow Hole, and bird watching locations. Other forms of assistance that are being considered is to minimize the impacts on livelihoods, such as training, alternate employment, subsistence support, or salary maintenance. Other slide, next slide, please. The immediate next steps for the Resettlement Action Plan, well, it's for finalization by the government of Montserrat, and that it would include validation of entitlement values and compensation budget, determination of final forms of assistance, continued stakeholder consultations, identification and verification of the project-affected persons, finalization and approval of the draft Resettlement Action Plan, and then finally the public disclosure of the final Resettlement Action Plan. Next slide. So the next steps for the ESIA itself and the ESMP and permitting, well, we're going to finalize the ESIA addendum and the ESMP depending on public comments received. We're going to prepare and submit the physical planning application to the government of Montserrat and the Planning and Development Authority, and if required, apply and obtain a certificate of environmental approval for the project from the Director of Environment. Next slide. I think we have reached the end of the presentation, and I'm going to return now to Governor Montserrat and the host. So if there are questions, they should all be submitted formally and for a formal response, if desired.
Thank you for the Stantec consultants for providing the synopsis of the design and also the ESIA addendum. The next steps going forward would be twofold. One, to complete the ESIA addendum and the public consultation process. On island, this is being championed by our consultant, Aldine Williams. The deadline for submission of comments is the 5th of July, so next week, Monday. and all comments are requested to be emailed to portproject@gov.ms. Secondly, the procurement of the design build services continues, and as previously mentioned, the deadline of the submission of bids is next week, Tuesday, the 6th of July. Upon receiving the bids would be assessed. We expect that that would take approximately a month. So therefore, around the middle of August, the bid assessment should be completed. Having accepted the bid submission report, GOM and CDB will review the report and ensure it's fit for purpose and it's okay. And the next step would be to negotiate and award a contract. Based on the program, we anticipate that the contract will be awarded by the end of September this year.
All right, thank you, Mr. Weeks, for outlining the next steps that would happen with the ESIA and our project going forward. And we do indeed look forward to seeing success with this project as it underpins our sustainable development plan and our economic growth strategy as well. So we're really looking forward to this project being successful. At this time, we're going to open the floors to have questions and answers. And we do have a microphone right there in the center. So if you so wish to ask a question, you can just walk right up to that microphone and direct your questions. Our consultants are still online, and we do have persons here as well who may be able to answer or give a response, or we will take the question and provide a response later on. Are we going to have it? Persons are able to provide questions online as well? Okay, so I understand that persons are able to ask your questions via live chat online as well. Yes, question.
Good night. Shane Caesar here, local fisher. So one may not know, well, not everyone, but I'm trying to find out if by chance that the government know that there is actually a disease on our reefs, and how is it caused, and if so, what is transporting it around like different reef on the island? It's not all over on the island reefs, but in Little Bay it is, in Carsway it is, on the jetty it is, killing the brain corals as well. And if it has been notified, what are the steps you're going to take to deal with it, and we have some more information about it. And sorry, I also mentioned that to say, if we're going to do something about it in continuing like the spread and stuff, and I heard you said about the stuff for the dust and stealth and stuff like that, the managing of moving it if possible or treating it.
Sam, are you still online?
Yes, I am.
Do you want to address this?
So, yes. When we surveyed the reefs in Little Bay, or the corals in Little Bay, all the way down to Potato Hill, there was no sign of stony coral tissue loss disease. So this is rather new information. And it depends on if the affected corals are very localized or is it widespread throughout Little Bay Reef. Just thinking out loud now, I didn't really give it more thought than what it is right now. Those corals that are affected, again, if it's a few individuals, it may be best that they not be transplanted or moved and maybe allowed to be killed or destroyed so that during the construction phase that maybe the disease will not spread further. I know that it is in the other parts of the Caribbean and not so much now at Eastern Caribbean, but it's very sad to hear that it is there now in Montserrat.
All right.
I hope that addresses your question.
Well, I mean, it sounds like he doesn't really sure about what's taking place in terms of the spread of it, per se. I don't know when he did his research or when he saw it, but right now it's getting even more worse under local reefs.
Hello? Right. They did their benthic survey, I think, the back end of last year. But in discussion with the Ministry of Agriculture, the Department of the Environment, they are aware of it, and apparently it's a problem not only in Montserrat, but other islands as far as south of Florida, from what we understand. In discussions again with Department of the Environment, they're keeping a keen eye on it, and I don't think, from what I understand, that there's any solution at hand for treating that disease, but I think the other islands are working on a solution. But
Right.
in terms of the port project itself, based on what was discovered, they wasn't there, but I believe it's an accelerating issue that's happening.
All right.
Yes, that
Thank
would
you,
be
sir.
it. Yeah, accelerating.
That's Sam? Thank you. Is there another question? We really would like to have your feedback, so and the floor is open at this time, even for the folks online as well. If you do have questions, please let us know. Ms. Williams is coming. Mrs. Williams is coming. Yeah. So apparently we do have some question from the live chat.
Okay. Are there printed materials available that give details on the scope of the project and elements of it that are proposed, and how can they be accessed? So in answering that question, this is what the ESIA addendum looks like. We have left a copy at the Montserrat Public Library, which is easily accessible. We also have this copy here, which we are leaving at the port security booth, so persons in Little Bay area could access it as well. And the document is also available online, but the two areas for printed material is at the public library or at the port security booth.
Thank you, Ms. Williams. So again, as Mrs. Williams outlined, that the hard copy of the document is available at the public library, and also there will be a copy at the Port Authority security booth. So if you so wish to see the document, read the document, it's available at those places, as well as for those of us who have access to online platforms, it's available there as well on Government of Montserrat website.
And there's another question. How long will this project take to develop?
As earlier indicated, we're following a process. At this point, we're on the closing end of procurement for the design and build contractor. We anticipate that we would have a contract in place by the end of September, and from the end of September, the duration of the project is estimated to be 18 months.
Okay, and the third question, what will be the effect of reducing or not including a breakwater? Current plan versus original plan. Does this not greatly reduce the protective element of the design, coast, beaches, safe shipping?
All right, Harold, are you there? This may be a question for you to answer.
Yes. So the pier as envisioned will be the pier itself. There will not be a large armored breakwater on the outside of the pier. Because of that, the harbor will still be protected from wave action for smaller waves. As I mentioned earlier, the pier will be sitting about 3 meters above low water. So for smaller wave action, 2-3 meters, the pier will offer protection to the inner harbor and a safe location to berth ships. With the removal of the breakwater during storm events, so you can imagine waves that are larger than say 2 meters and upwards of the 3, 4, 5, 6 meter waves that can be expected during storm events. Those could overtop the pier. So at that point, the pier cannot function. I mean, what I mean by that is it's not available to be vessels to be tied up at. You cannot carry on with cargo operations or unloading passengers. So that's just during storm events. The previous design with the very large breakwater protected the berth during storm events as well as the pier as envisioned now will reduce the downtime. So that means the amount of time that you cannot call in Montserrat significantly. It will not reduce it as much as it would with a large armor unit breakwater on the exterior of the pier. So it's providing a substantial amount of benefit to the island, but not to the same level as having the large breakwater on the exterior of the pier.
Thank you, Harold. Is there another question?
Yes, there is. Okay. What size cruise ship will this port accommodate?
Again, I believe Harold would have outlined a number of the cruise ships that this structure will be able to accommodate. Harold, can you just reiterate that again?
The pier itself, the berth face is roughly 130 meters long. Unlike cargo ships, cruise ships can overhang the pier, and that's why we've put the Dolphin. So we did design the pier to accommodate a vessel as large as the windsurf, which it's a bit deceptive with the windsurf because it has a large bowsprit because it is a sailing vessel, but it has a length of 187 meters, but in reality, the hull is around 160 meters. So that would be about the largest cruise ship that could be accommodated at the facility. Any cruise ship that is longer than 130 meters, its bow or its stern would overhang the pier, but that's generally accepted during calmer conditions by a cruise ship because essentially they really only need access to the pier at roughly the middle third of the ship because that's where the doors are and that's where the passengers disembark and embark onto the cruise ship.
Thank you. Is there any questions in the meanwhile from the audience? No? Okay, I think we do have a few more questions from online.
You state fishers will have to moor elsewhere during construction, but what about yachts?
There's a question here, Sam. That's probably Harold as well. Can you respond to that question? What about the yachts?
I don't believe yachts. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. Maybe the port's online. So, I mean, yachts would not be able to moor in the location of where the construction is going on now. I mean, that area generally is where the fisher folk moor now. So I don't believe yachts are mooring in that facility now. I understand the yachts are generally moored further out, and I believe they can continue to moor generally in where they have been, but certainly in the immediate vicinity of where we're constructing the pier, yachts are not able to moor in that location.
Thank you. Yes, I see one hand in the audience. Can you approach the mic, please? Yes, someone is coming in. Good night, sir.
When I look at the drawings there at the entrance of the new jetty, the space, it look small for big containers and trailers to operate. I want to know if you have in mind to take off some of the bluff, and whether you're taking it off or not, you state that you would be stabilizing the bluff. How would you go about doing the stabilizing of the bluff?
Harold, can you come back there?
Yeah, so there's really two parts to the question. So one was some concern with regard to maneuverability and access for ships to get into the berth. The area that I had showed for the dredging, so that'll be basically the new harbor basin and the harbor entrance. That has been, the design of that was developed in conjunction with a master mariner, a gentleman by the name of Captain Yost de Clare, who is 30 years experience at sea, as well as he was the former harbor master and vice president of operations at the Port of Vancouver, the Port of Montreal, and the Port of Quebec. So he did the initial review and design for that spatial requirement. In addition, the government of Montserrat also visited with, I believe, 2 or 3 of the major cruise lines, including Carnival and Royal Caribbean. And they also reviewed the spatial requirements for accessing the berth, for allowing their ships, such as the Sea Dream or the Windsurf. The Sea Dream is actually owned by Royal Caribbean. The Windsurf is part of Windstar, which is owned by Carnival. And their master mariners and operations personnel also reviewed it and felt that there was sufficient space, more than adequate space to maneuver the vessels into the berth. That does not require, I mean, the intent was we want to minimize excavation and touching the bluff, since all of the works are located in front of the bluff without any excavation, but we do want to stabilize the berth. So there has been an initial assessment of the bluff by geotechnical engineers, but it will be ultimately up to the contractor to do their own assessment. We basically want to prevent any slides or rock falls. So we anticipate, and this is subject to the contractor's final assessment, but we anticipate that they may identify areas that are loose, and we do what's called scaling. So they may dig away those areas, pull those loose areas down. There is a feature that's a pillar that looks vulnerable to collapsing. They may pull that down. They may look at things like putting up screens, mesh, as well as bolting loose areas. So part of the design build contract is to do a full detailed assessment of the bluff and identify weak areas that can either be scaled, which is mean you're basically just kind of scraping the surface to pull off the loose material before it goes down on its own weight, or potentially installing rock bolts, as well as potential screen mesh to hold back loose areas or vulnerable areas.
Thank you there, Harold. We're going to go back online.
Since public comment closes in 1 week, will any consideration be given to extend the comments by 2 weeks?
The publication of the documents were done first on the 18th of June. We had set additional 2 weeks that closes on the 5th of July, but we can definitely consider in discussions with our funding partners and stakeholder in government to see if we can extend it for a further 2 weeks.
What about the ferry service? How long will it take to reinstate? And the port? Will it be 18 months from today?
So,
Go ahead, Harold.
yeah, so during construction, the existing port will be in operation. The existing jetty will be in operation. So it is a condition on the design build contractor that they are not to interfere with ongoing operations. So the cargo ships that you see today, which are smaller ones, generally ro-ro vessels, they will continue to call at the jetty, as I think a lot of you have seen, because the existing jetty side berth has been silted in. They often berth stern on and unload the containers. So we anticipate the contractor will do the maintenance dredging along the side quite early on in the process. And that allows then those ships to then, they've got sufficient water draft now, water depth along the side of the jetty that they can move along and use the existing jetty as it was initially done when it was constructed in '97, and use the existing ro-ro ramp. So and the ferry can also call in that location. So the existing port will be in operation throughout the entire construction period. There may be the odd time they may have to delay a vessel for a day, but that's all has to be planned in advance. If the contractor is doing an operation where it may impact operations, they need to notify the Port Authority and make plans to mitigate and accommodate ongoing operations at the port.
Thank you.
Will another boat launch ramp be made available, or will the existing ramp be available for use? Well, I think you've answered that question a while ago.
Harold, you heard that question. Would another boat ramp be made available on the new pier?
So there really is no boat ramp now. The ramp they might be referring to is the ro-ro ramp that's adjacent to the existing jetty. So that's really a ramp intended not for launching boats, but really for a ramp from a vessel to come down when you're doing rolling on and rolling off cargo and cars and such. So that ramp with the dredging, the maintenance dredging at the existing jetty, the service of that ramp will be put back into service because they can't really use it now because they haven't got sufficient water depth. And there will be a newer, larger ro-ro ramp constructed as part of the new pier.
All right, thank you.
It is local knowledge that we are affected by rough seas, and the proposed pier seems to be placed where the rolling seas form before breaking onto present pier. Will this still affect construction?
So yes, I mean, it is a challenging location. Anytime you're constructing a new marine structure, a pier, a jetty, a breakwater in an exposed site, that presents challenges to the contractor. They will try to, now they are designing the pier themselves. So they will, we suspect that they will come up with a design that can be constructed quite rapidly in exposed site. So they're not exposed for example, when they place fill for the causeway, they should quickly place the armor on top to protect it. But it is an area that is exposed, and the contractor needs to take that into accommodation doing their design and their construction methodology. I mean, the wave conditions, the wind conditions, all of that data has been provided to the contractors on which to base their bids.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Harold, for your response. But I must ask, isn't the current design a limitation? I mean, since we are actually making this step, why are we not making it large enough for a large-size cruise ship? Do it once and be done with it.
So the design criteria that we were given was to design for what's called pocket cruise ships. So these are high-end luxury cruise ships that generally, have 300 or 400 passengers. I don't think, now we weren't part of the market assessment for bringing in, the large ships that carry 2,000 to 5,000 passengers. I would have to defer to the Port Authority or the government, the market assessment of that. I don't believe, just the facilities themselves for Montserrat to accommodate 3,000 passengers on one day would be quite overwhelming for the community. So it was always the intention to have the ability to accommodate the pocket cruise ships that call today and slightly larger, but allow them to call directly. In other words, tie up at a pier so passengers can more comfortably disembark and later embark back onto the cruise ship as opposed to having to be tendered in on a small boat.
Thank you. So is there anyone in the audience at this time that has a question? You can just approach the mic. If not, we just go back online.
How many berthing buoys will be accommodated after the project is completed?
I think, Dion, that's for the fisher folk. How many buoys will be?
Given that most of the fishers would have been out of the water with access to trailers, initial discussions were that there will be 5 buoys allocated to those fishers who fish daily. I think there are about 1 or 2 or 3 of them. But in discussions with the fishers last week, they were requesting some more buoys. That is one of the comments we have under consideration, and there were some ideas put forward. So providing more than 5 is something that we're currently reviewing.
Thank you. Please confirm if the new design has factored in a weight station and reefer plugs.
So I can answer that one. It's Harold Westerman again. So the project that's envisioned here is strictly for the marine infrastructure, and essentially a new pier and a ro-ro ramp to accommodate larger vessels. The current project does not include any upgrades to the inland port facilities. That may be something else that the Montserrat Port Authority is considering as a separate contract. But generally, the weight station, reefer plugs, that forms part of the actual inland port facilities, not the marine structures. This project is strictly to enhance and improve the marine infrastructure at the port, not the inland facilities.
Thank you. Can a breakwater be added over time after the pier is constructed?
I'm very glad that someone asked that question because yes, so it is a condition of the design that the designer for the contractor must design for 2 conditions. The pier must be designed as a solid structure, as I described earlier, not on piles. Okay, so it's going to be a solid structure. It has to be designed to withstand the impacts of those large waves because there is no rubble or concrete armor unit breakwater on the outside of the facility. But it also must be designed to allow a future construction of an armored stone breakwater on the outside of the pier. So they're essentially designing the pier for two load conditions. One, direct impact from wave, and two, supporting the weight of a breakwater and the waves impacting a breakwater in the future. So yes, the short answer is yes.
Thank you. With two possible designs, what are the prospective bidders actually bidding for? It seems likely the new proposals significantly impact recreational use of Little Bay. What is being done to mitigate this?
I can answer the first one. Maybe Sam, you can answer the second one. The first question is the bidders they're only asking to bid on the option where there's just the 130 meter pier. There's no, I mean, I know Sam had shown what the option was earlier, but it's been scaled back where it's just the 130 meter pier with the mooring dolphin, no armored breakwater, the full length of the pier on the outside, on the seaward side. So there's only one design that's being tendered right now, and which we will receive bids on next week. Sam, maybe you can talk about the recreational use of Little Bay.
Yes. So the recreation for Little Bay has the potential to be impacted, and it needs to be recognized that it is not the entire Little Bay Reef that is being impacted. There is a portion where we do have corals and close to the bluff. And we are, as part of the mitigation, we were envisioning transplanting of those corals to another location that's to be determined with the Department of Environment and other stakeholders, where it could be a good nearby location to augment that reef and thereby maybe displacing the tourism from, in closer to Little Bay Reef, further out, maybe towards the Rendezvous Reef itself. And that is a possibility. So it is the tourism on the reef itself is part of, and the project affected persons, it's part of the resettlement action plan that's being developed and considered. There will be, again, ongoing discussions and ways to try to mitigate this recreational aspect of where the fact that once you have the port built, trying to make it more how do I say, amenable to recreational reef. It's still something that is a work in progress and cannot be fully designed at this stage right now. But it is something that can be mitigated through the coral transplant and relocation plan and through the resettlement action plan.
Thank you, Sam and Harold. Is there a question in our audience, in our immediate audience? Go right ahead, sir.
Shane C's here again, local fisher. Just a question. In terms of free flow access of the sea in the Little Bay area, in terms of when you have to move around your equipment or something, maybe by a barge or from, let's say, Piper's Pond, if that's where you put in the heavy equipment and what's not what, will there be like a shut-off time for the fishers to pass? You might have a barge passing, you don't want the wave to disturb it. Will there be someone directing it? And in terms of safety, who's going to be out there to conduct that? As well, for the port, will there be a plan in terms of fishers having to access the port when the cruise line is here, and if we would have to be shut off and let the cruise liners come out before we do enter with our trailers or necessary items? Will it be managed?
All right, so I see your question. There's two parts to your question. One is during construction, and the other one is post-construction. Harold, you want to go for the first part?
So the main construction is occurring inside the port. So my understanding is, and correct me if I'm wrong, Dion, I mean, the launching of the trailers will occur not within the port because there is no boat launch there. It occurs off the beach in Little Bay. And that area is, I mean, there may be the nearest thing that's occurring there would be the dredging. Obviously, the Port Authority, it is an active port. The harbor master and the Port Authority, working in conjunction with the contractor's representative and their health and safety officer, will need to monitor all movements, and no different than when a ship is calling now, to ensure the safe movement of both vessels as well as the fisher folk. The majority of the construction is occurring further out than the existing jetty, closer into Little Bay and the beach area could be a dredger working. And I mean by a dredger, it's probably a crane on a barge with a clamshell dredge. We anticipate they'll do clamshell dredging. That's to be confirmed. But of course, those movements and will be closely monitored by the Port Authority. And every week, the contractor needs to present to the government and the port their movements and their plans for the upcoming week, and that can be shared and posted for fisher folk and other mariners to make their plans accordingly.
Thanks. Did that address your question sufficiently, Shane? Okay, may I add to Harold's comment? If the contractor decides to establish his compound at Piper's Pond and use the sea access to transport his material to the site, as part of the contractor's health and safety management system, he would have to put that in place to ensure he gets approval from us first, and where we would contact fishers like you to ensure that the plan is a safe and approved plan to allow fishers to maneuver in and out of the basin without the risk of damage from the contractor's equipment. So that's one of the requirements on behalf of the contractor, to ensure that the fishers and port operation in general continues while the implementation of the project progresses. Just a side note, there is a slipway on the south side of the existing ro-ro ramp that fishers use to launch and retrieve their vessels. The port manager is here, and I acknowledge his presence. And please feel free to add to the comment if you wish, sir, in terms of access to the port.
Good evening, everybody. So the question I will address is the post-construction question. And in fact, post-construction, the situation would be significantly improved relative to the situation we have on the ground now, by virtue of the fact that we'll have two berths in operation. The new berth, which is designed to accept the cruise ships that were queried as to when they're in port, what would happen with the fishers and the other traffic. The existing southern berth would certainly accommodate the fishers, and in fact, possibly even some cargo vessels, without interrupting the operations of the tourists on the newer berth. Of course, all of this would have to be managed, but at the end of the day, we will have more resources at our disposal to handle the incoming traffic, both passenger, cruise, cargo, pleasure craft, fisher folk. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. And I think we have a few more questions online as we get ready to closer to the end of today's proceedings.
Will space be available for yachters after completion inside the harbor? Or would they still be required to anchor outside?
The yachters would still require to anchor outside.
Thank you. Who will monitor water quality at Little Bay, and for how long will it be monitored?
The intention is to monitor the water quality before the construction, during the construction, and after the construction, perhaps up to 12 months.
What is the design life of the port?
Harold, that is a question for you.
50 years.
Thank you. How is this new port an advantage over the existing port, since it will be unusable during rough weather?
Harold, you want to take a shot at this one?
There's a significant a new advantages of the new port. So right now the existing jetty really provides no protection whatsoever to wave action. The new pier will provide protection to normal waves. It will act as a breakwater for lower height waves of 1.5 to 2.5 meters. Yes, it does not provide protection during storm events such as a tropical storm or a hurricane. The other major advantages of the new port is a longer, wider pier, so you can accommodate much larger cargo ships. You can bring in cruise ships. So none of those vessels can call today in Montserrat. You can't bring in 120-meter long container ships, even 100-meter long container ships. That will now be able to call. Those will now be able to call at Montserrat once the pier is constructed. Cruise ships will no longer be required to anchor offshore and tender passengers in. They will now be able to tie up at the pier and allow for the safe and pleasant disembarkation and embarkation of their guests. So there's significant advantages offered by the new port facility over the existing.
All right, thank you. Also, I think added to that scenario that in a lot of the cases, the ships will prefer to move to a safe harbor where storms are not impacting immediately.
Also, may I add to this scenario is if there are waves 2.5 to 3 meters that are breaking over the existing jetty up to 4 meters, and correct me if I'm wrong, Harold, that would dissipate a lot of the wave energy on the new jetty, and the existing jetty will be available. So in the scenarios where the ferry currently is unable to berth at the existing jetty, those similar conditions, the new jetty would dissipate those wave conditions and have a safer, calmer environment for the ferry on the existing jetty.
Yes, absolutely.
All right, thank you. Do we have another question in our audience? Meanwhile, we wait on our question in the audience. We go back online.
Okay, we have 3 more questions. Can all or some of the dredge material be recycled or repurposed? For example, material to build the pier, the breakwater, or other infrastructure?
Harold, that is a question for you.
Yes. pending a final geotechnical assessment of the material that will be dredged, which will be undertaken by the design build contractor, we encourage, it's to the benefit of the contractor to look at opportunities to reuse that dredged material. One potential opportunity is fill within the pier itself. As I said, it's going to be a solid structure. One potential design methodology for the pier is concrete caisson. These are basically large concrete boxes that will sit on the seabed. They do need to be ballasted down. We anticipate that the dredge material could be used for that. It may also use some of the material for the fill for the causeway road. So there's a number of opportunities to reuse that dredge material. If the contractor so chooses, has surplus material, or some of the material is not deemed to be structurally suitable for a particular use, that's when that material may be disposed of at sea in the location that we identified previously. But it's to the contractor's advantage to look for opportunities to reuse that dredge material within the construction itself.
Thank you. Will an access road along the coast connecting Cars Bay to Little Bay be considered as an increased access for overall port public use?
Not as part of this project.
Okay, this question is for Sam. And it's a follow-up question in relation to the beach users and the reef users accessing the Little Bay area. The person who's asking are saying that your response is more relating to beach use, but they want to know how about the beachgoers in general accessing the Little Bay area, using the Little Bay area for recreational use.
Sam, you there?
Yes, I'm here. So if I understand correctly, it's for the beachgoers to swim all the way to Little Bay Reef. Is that the intention of the question?
I think just to swim, period, Sam, like people going to the beach.
Yes, well, I think people going to the beach and swimming in front of Little Bay Beach should still be accessible to them and to enjoy the beach. The contractor for the dredging works are not likely to be encroaching to the beach or close to the beach. So that should still be possible for beachgoers to use the beach and enjoy that even during the construction phase.
Thank you.
What is the estimated additional cost of a breakwater to protect the proposed pier?
Harold, is there a response to that?
The estimate for building the extended armor stone breakwater on the outside of the pier is in the order, this is an order of magnitude, roughly $30 million.
Can you specify the currency, Harold?
US dollars.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Thank you very much. And that is the final question.
All right, thank you very much to our online.
I think there's a question about sea level rise.
Yes, there's a question. Has the design of the port taken into account rising sea levels as a result of global warming?
Harold, that's right up
The
here.
answer is yes, we did do an extensive climate risk and vulnerability assessment for the project. From that became really two main items, was designing, really three things regarding global warming and climate change. One was a greater intensity of rainfall in future storm events. So the drainage system is designed for more intense rainfall events. Secondly, We do anticipate in the future, and we've all seen it in recent years, more frequent and more intense storm events, tropical storms and hurricanes. That's been factored into the wave height design that the contractors must design for. And thirdly, we did review sea level rise, and we used we used the projections from the U.S. National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, and they have a number of sea level rise projections for the region. We selected the intermediate projection, which anticipates a sea level rise of just under 0.6 meters over the course of the next, I believe it was the next 75 years. So that really impacts the deck elevation of the new pier. And you will notice once it's constructed, the final deck elevation of the new pier will be roughly 1.5 meters. I believe it was 1.5 meters, if I remember correctly, higher than the existing jetty. And a lot of that is because of sea level rise.
Thank you very much. And that was the last question.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to allow the opportunity to our immediate audience for one last question. If you have one burning question, the opportune time is now. Okay. So at this time, as we bring this public forum to a close, I want to express gratitude and thanks to our audience, both in-house and online, and for asking such pertinent questions, as we do recognize the importance of this project to our nation and how it would impact or improve our livelihood here on Montserrat. And we do look forward again to having a successful project. So again, I say thank you for being a lovely audience. Also to the Minister for bringing brief remarks, and to the Stantec team for providing such vital information and for responding to our question today. Harold, Sam, and also we had Justin as well. And to our local engineering and consulting team, we say thank you to you as well for assisting this process. And to our media team for allowing us to broadcast this town hall meeting live, and for allowing those on the virtual platform to participate as well. And to everyone, we say good night and thanks again for coming. Remember, we do have hard copies of the ESIA located at the public library, and one will be stationed at the Port Authority security gate, and it's also available online as well from the Government of Montserrat website. Thanks again.